Great. Let's begin. Okay, today is going to be a interesting session. I'll tell you why. It's going to be a little different from the previous sessions. I'll quickly. Yesterday we had a bit of a heavy session, and we talked about the mechanism of human experience coming about. Right. So we went through the teaching of dependent origination. How, in a moment, there is an interaction that you have with the environment, some contact that is related to your eye, ear, nose, mind, tongue, body. Some contact happens, there is a feeling sensation that is associated with it. And depending on how painful or pleasant it is, your mind may attach itself to it and start thinking that is the most important thing in the world and become personally involved in it. I like it, I don't like it. I want it to be this way. I don't want it to be this way. When we practice, we see that multiple things arise in our mind without us asking them to come up. Am I audible? I think I just froze for a minute. Am I audible? Yeah. Great. So multiple things come up in our mind. By now, all of us are practicing. We understand that we did not ask these things to come up. We didn't intend these things to come up. We intended the object of meditation to come up and to be there. But every other thought did not come up because we asked it to happen. Most of the time, we feel a sense of agency that I am doing this and I'm doing something else next, and I decided to do this, or I felt like this, and therefore I'm doing this. Right. So that is the way we understand the world. But when we start going deeper, we start seeing that the beginning of any thought process can be something impersonal, can be something that's happened in the environment, and it only starts becoming personal when we start attaching ourselves to it, when we start creating a model of it with us at the center. That this is, I like it or I don't like it, and this is what I think about it. This is what the reality is. This is what the story is. And from there, we, as soon as we start taking things personally, we are likely to go down a beaten path of compulsive action. So that is what is happening in typical life. And we discussed how we can break that cycle at the point of the 6 hours itself, right? How we can use the 6 hours to come out of that craving, to not go down that compulsive slide, to see things as they are, to understand whether there is something wholesome that we can do that causes minimum suffering to ourselves and to other people that are involved, right? And then can we take that action? This is why 6 hours or harmonious practice is called, also called as right effort, right? It brings us towards a path that causes least suffering. So an interesting thing that is related to how this mechanism happens, how a thought comes and suddenly it becomes yours, suddenly it becomes you, suddenly it becomes what you think about it, right? And your story completely, you get completely trapped in that story. You don't think that, okay, this happened. You are thinking, why is this happening to me? Or what do I want out of this situation, right? So there are three teachings that the Buddha gave that is related to this. So the first of these teachings is the teaching of impermanence or anatta, anittita or anicca. Right. So anicca is what it's called in Pali. Anittita is what you can call it in Sanskrit or Hindi. So the first teaching that the Buddha gave is that things always emerge because there are conditions that are supporting them. As soon as those conditions go away, whatever emerged because of it will also go away. And therefore, these things do not have a fundamental essence that lasts for eternity. Everything that we experience, so even the laptop that I'm speaking to you on is working and I'm able to talk to you because of a lot of conditions being in place for this to happen. And as you've seen this week, my internet may give up, and as soon as the underlying condition changes, the experience also changes. That's already happened. So we can see impermanence in action. So what the Buddha maintains is that everything is impermanent, and we know from now. Maybe there was a time when people would think that the sun was something permanent or the earth is something permanent, but they are all there because the conditions are right for them. At some point, the conditions may change and things will not be the same, right? So, the first thing that the Buddha, one characteristic of reality that the Buddha talks about is impermanence, how things are. And in fact, he says all conditioned things. So, all things that are coming up because they are dependent on other things to be there. And if we look around us, everything that we know, everything that we see, even our own bodies are there currently because there are conditions that are right for it, and they change as the conditions change, underlying conditions change. We go from a small child to a adult, and we age and we start shrinking. So things changes happen throughout our life. We've known people who have just taken birth, we know people who have passed away. So things are impermanent at all points of time. The other thing that the Buddha talks about, the second characteristic, is anatta or anatman. What he says is that even our perception of the self, okay, so this is important. The Buddha never says that there is no eternal self or there is an eternal self. So he doesn't say make an argument in either direction. What he does say is what we perceive as self is something that is dependent on condition. Just like we talked about impermanence, what we see as self is also coming together because of conditions. So right now, I have assumed a certain identity because I'm talking to you. Okay. Now, if my dog comes and scratches at the door, I will be assuming a different identity when I talk to my dog or tell him to go away. If I go to the shop to buy something, I have a very different identity. Right? If I've parked in the wrong spot and I'm getting pulled up by a police officer, then I have a different identity in that situation. So what the Buddha also contends, and you can see this, right? So I'm sure everyone has faced a moment where you feel like one part of me thinks this and one part of me thinks that. So one part of me wants to have a burger, one part of me wants to eat healthy, right? So what are these different parts of the self, right? These are different identities that are coming up for a specific moment to deal with that situation. So what we experience is a sense of self that comes up to deal with that situation. So to deal with a cop, I will assume a certain identity. To deal with my dog, I'll assume a certain identity. To deal with my family, I'll assume a certain identity. To have this talk, I'll assume a certain identity. And it's not just identity I'm putting on for the benefit of others. It is what I see myself as, right? And that is why it is possible for us to hold conflicting identities also. I want to get healthy, but I don't want to wake up early and do my exercise. I want to do X, I don't want to do that. So what are these conflicting? So these are different selves that come up because they are dependent on underlying conditions. So if there was a contact, if there was a thought that came, then why not take it easy, right? To make sense of that thought, there will be craving. So that why not take it easy will bring up a feeling, it will draw attention to it. And then we come up with a story of why or why not one should take it easy. And similarly, there's another thought that comes up that should lose weight, maybe, right? And that thought leads to another story where you're saying, I need to do this. And what happens is often we have this identity that is continuously putting us in conflict. What can also happen is we can also feel very powerless. So, have you ever experienced somebody saying that I lost my temper because the other person said something, right? So, it is about the other person, and suddenly I have my identity has become something. So, your identity should not be in the hands of someone else, right? So, it's you could have chosen not to lose your temper. You could have had a different identity. And what happens is sometimes the identity can make us helpless or powerless, right? So somebody saying that I lost my temper, I became angry, I got a bitter taste in my mind, in my mouth, in my heart, just because somebody else did something, means a loss of agency. It means that we have created an identity that is weak, that is dependent on the external world cooperating with us to be happy. So, one of the key teachings that the Buddha gives is understanding that the identity that we assume at any point of time is not a permanent identity. It is something that we have come up with to make the sense of what the situation that is happening. How do I deal with this situation? And it is colored by our conditioning. So in the past, if I have had such a conditioning, right? So then I'll behave in a certain way. If I'm scared of somebody because they bullied me when I was a child, it may be that even if I'm extremely tall and strong, today I'll still be scared of that person because I assume that identity, that same identity, that is part of my conditioning. So the Buddha asks us to see that at any point of time. Why do we have so many multiple identities, a different identity? On one side, you may be, fighting for climate change, but at the same time, you may book a taxi where you're the only passenger in it, right? So why do we have so many conflicting identities? We tell the same person that we love them and respect them, and we then, shout at them and scream at them, the same person and the same relationship, right? To same two people. So what's happening is we have this impermanent identity, this concept, this sense of self that comes up anytime we are in a situation to deal with that situation. And we deal with it based on our past habits, based on our condition. And this is a very powerful idea because this tells us that with the right conditioning and with the right understanding of how mind works, we can actually assume a very different identity at that point of time. It's not something that we decide deliberately that this is how I should be. And okay, this is we are not a international person of mystery, but we can start making our identities more expansive and generous and powerful. One example is whenever you keep your mind in the Brahma Vihara, right? You always have something to give. You can give a smile. If you have nothing else, you can give a smile. You can act with loving kindness, you can act with compassion, you can act with joy, you can act with equanimity. When you have something to give, when you can make a positive change to any situation, that is not a loss. That is not the same as having an identity which says the world is not the way I want it to be, and I have a problem with that, having a friction with the world as a result of that. So, this was the second characteristic. And the third characteristic is something that features in the Four Noble Truths as well, is suffering. So when we don't understand these two characteristics, when we don't understand impermanence, things will change. Things that we want, if we want the world to be in a certain way, and it is in that certain way, it will change when it is no longer in that certain way. We may lose loved ones, we may lose our health, we may lose a job. So if we like something and we want the world to be that way, it will change. If we don't like something, that may come to us also. You may get disease, you may have a loss of something. So impermanence, and when things change, if we take it personally, if we say this is me, this is mine, and we say this is what I want the world to be, we assume an identity that is in conflict with what reality is. It says that I want the world to be in a certain way, but because of impermanence, now that it is changed, I can no longer be happy. So if you don't understand these two characteristics intrinsically, not intellectually, but in your own experience, you don't start seeing this, then every moment has the potential of dissatisfaction or suffering, dukkha. I want the world to be this way. The I, which we assume to be the permanent self, that I'll always want this, right? And the things to be this way, being subject to impermanence, always changing, always being dependent on whatever conditions actually supported things to be in a certain way. So if we predicate our happiness on that, that only in this instance, when this identity that I have assumed at this moment is faced with a world that is configured in a certain way, will I be happy? Then we are always setting ourselves up for dissatisfaction and disappointment. So I just wanted to comment on that. And The three characteristics, I'll just repeat, anicca or impermanence. Things are always in flux, things are always changing, things are dependent on underlying condition. Anatta or anatta, impersonality or non-self. The self that we assume is not a permanent self. The Buddha doesn't deny or confirm whether or not you have a permanent self, but he says what you experience in that moment is actually a sense of self. It's a strategy for dealing with the world at that point of time. Things that happen, you personalize it by saying, I thought of this, I felt like doing this, I want to do this, I like this, I don't like it. But it is actually things, something has happened in your environment and your mind has gripped onto it with craving and created that identity for you at that point. And the third characteristic is of dukkha or dissatisfaction, which arises from not understanding the first two. How do you see this? Just one simple way to look at it is in your practice, whenever you feel restlessness, for instance, right? Your mind will say, I have sat for a long time. I should get up. I'm probably getting late. Just try to understand that it's a thought that has come up. Depersonalize it. It's a thought that has come up. It's a thought of restlessness that has come up. Now my mind has grabbed onto it and created this little identity which says, I want to do something else. I want some new stimulation, some new excitement. Just experiment with this, see what happens. Once you stop thinking that I have been sitting for a long time, I think it is enough. Instead of that, just try to understand whether you can depersonalize it by saying it is a thought of restlessness that has come up and now taken my attention. And the same thing happens for any situation, right? Any situation where you're emotionally agitated. Can you see that? That something has happened. It's instead of going, why is this happening to me? Or why is this not happening to me? And I want it this way or I want it that way. Can we take a step back and see that something has happened? What is the best action I can do that will not cause me suffering and others suffering? So that's an experiment that you can try out, and you can also try to use it in your practice, right? The sooner you catch your mind getting distracted, the more easily you can see this impersonality, the impermanence. Things are coming up in your mind, then going away, either because you used the 6 hours or because your attention didn't stay with those things. Even your object of meditation comes up and it goes away. So you're seeing impermanence at all points of time. You are, as you start going deeper and deeper, you will also start seeing the impersonality in that process. Okay. So I wanted to talk about the three characteristics, and today I said something interesting is I'm going to do a sutta reading. This is a very repetitive sutta reading. So I talked about the oral tradition earlier, right? And the oral tradition was designed to land in your mind in a certain way. It would land in certain parts of your mind. And it was also designed in a way that could be repeated and transmitted easily. Right? The way the oral tradition was transmitted is that in any of the traditions, right? Jain, Buddha, or the Advaita, any of the traditions, the way oral traditions would work is that a teacher would recite something, students would learn it, and then each one of them would recite it, and the others would correct it. So everyone is hearing and correcting it multiple times, and that way it would get embedded in their mind. And whenever the opportunity came at the right time, they would actually also experience the reality of it or applicability of it in life. So just to honor that oral tradition and because it works, right? I'll do this sutta, and they're designed in a way that people could also memorize it easily. So this sutta talks about impersonality. It also talks about dependent origination and how, in a way about impermanence, right? So how things come together because the conditions are right for them. So even if we look at our body, we know that all our cells get replenished continuously, right? This is not the body that you were born with. This is not the body you'll have in 10 years' time. Not a single cell will be the same, right? So we see that impermanence. And the Buddha says, look at that and then think about what it means when you say self, right? So you're maybe the same child who said that I want to get this toy aeroplane, otherwise I'm going to cry my heart out, right? And you're not the same person today, right? You're definitely not the same person. So, is it sensible to think of something as a permanent self or not? So, that is what the sutta is about. It's from the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses of the Buddha. Chachak Sutta, oh, this is Sutta number 148, the six sets of six. I'll just take a sip. It's going to be a while and it's going to be repetitive. Just I would suggest that you can, just listen. Like give ear is the word translation that is normally given, but focus on listening rather than looking at me. So focus on listening to the words and allow them to just seep in. Chachak Sut, the six sets of six. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Shravasti in Jetha's Grove, Anathapindik's park. There he addressed the Bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, they replied, the Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, I shall teach you the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, with the right meaning and phrasing. I shall reveal a wise life that is utterly perfect and pure, that is, the six sets of six. Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, Venerable Sir, the Bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this: the six internal bases should be understood. The six external bases should be understood. The six classes of consciousness should be understood. The six classes of contact should be understood. The six classes of feeling should be understood. The six classes of craving should be understood. The six internal bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? There are the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, and the mind base. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The six internal bases should be understood. This is the first set of six. The six external bases should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? There are the visual form base, the sound base, the odor base, the flavor base, the tangible base, and the mind object base. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The six external bases should be understood. This is the second set of six. The six classes of consciousness should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and visual forms, eye consciousness arises. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The six classes of consciousness should be understood. This is the third set of six. The six classes of contact should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and visual forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. So it was with reference to this was said, the 6 classes of contact should be understood. This is the 4th set of 6. The 6 classes of feeling should be understood. So it was said. And with reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and visual form, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the eye, ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. So it was with reference to this that it was said, the 6 classes of feeling should be understood. This is the 5th set of 6. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. So it was said. And reference to what was this said? Dependent on the eye and visual forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the ear and sounds, ear consciousness arises. With ear consciousness, the meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the nose and odors, nose consciousness arises. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the tongue and flavors, tongue consciousness arises. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the body and tangibles, body consciousness arises. With feeling as condition, there is craving. Dependent on the mind and mind objects, mind consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. So it was with reference to this that it was said. The 6 classes of craving should be understood. This is the 6th set of 6. If anyone says the I is self, that is not tenable. The arising and passing away of the I can be discerned. And since its arising and passing away are discerned, it would follow my self arises and passes away. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the I is self, thus the I is not self. If anyone says forms are self, that is not tenable. Since the rise and fall of forms is discerned, it is not tenable for anyone to say forms are self. Thus, the I is not self, forms are not self. If anyone says I consciousness is self, it is not tenable for anyone to say I consciousness is self. Thus, the I is not self, visual forms are not self, I consciousness is not self. If anyone says eye contact is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of eye contact are discerned. Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say, eye contact is self. Thus, the eye is not self, visual forms are not self, eye conscious is not self, eye contact is not self. If anyone says feeling is self, this is not tenable. Thus, the eye is not self, visual forms are not self, eye conscious is not self, eye contact is not self, feeling is not self. If anyone says craving is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the eye is not self, visual forms are not self, eye consciousness is not self, eye contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the ear is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the ear are discerned, and since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the ear is self. Thus, the ear is not self. If anyone says sounds are self, ear consciousness is self, ear contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. Ear is not self, sounds are not self, ear consciousness is not self, ear contact is not self, feeling is not self, and craving is not self. If anyone says the nose is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the nose are discerned, and since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself arises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the nose is self, thus the nose is not self. If anyone says odors are self, nose consciousness is self, nose contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. Since the rise and fall of these are discerned, it would follow myself and rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say nose is self, odors are self, nose consciousness is self, nose contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self. Thus, the nose is not self, odors are not self, nose consciousness is not self, nose contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the tongue is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the tongue are discerned, and since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the tongue is self. Thus, the tongue is not self. If anyone says flavors are self, tongue consciousness is self, tongue contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the tongue is not self, flavors are not self, tongue consciousness is not self, tongue contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the body is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the body are discerned, and since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself arises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say the body is self. Thus, the body is not self. If anyone says tangibles are self, body consciousness is self, body contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the body is not self, tangibles are not self, body consciousness is not self, body contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. If anyone says the mind is self, that is not tenable. The rise and fall of the mind are discerned, Since its rise and fall are discerned, it would follow myself rises and falls. That is why it is not tenable for anyone to say, the mind is self. Thus, the mind is not self. If anyone says, thoughts are self, mind consciousness is self, mind contact is self, feeling is self, craving is self, that is not tenable. Thus, the mind is not self, thoughts are not self, mind consciousness is not self, mind contact is not self, feeling is not self, craving is not self. Now, bhikkhus, this is the way leading to the origination of identity. One regards the I thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards visual forms thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards I consciousness thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards eye contact thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards feelings thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards craving thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the ear thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the nose thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the tongue thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the body thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards the mind thus: this is mine, this is I am, this is myself. One regards thoughts thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards mind consciousness thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards mind contact thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards feeling thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards craving thus: this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Now, bhikkhus, this is the way leading to the cessation of identity. One regards the I thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards visual forms thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards I consciousness thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards eye contact thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards feelings thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards cravings thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards the ear thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards the nose thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards the tongue thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards the body thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards the mind thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards mind objects thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards mind consciousness thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards mind contact thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. One regards feelings thus: this is not mine, this is I am not, this is not myself. One regards craving thus: this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. The underlying tendencies, because dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. When one is touched by a pleasant feeling, if one delights in it, attaches to it, remains holding on to it, then the underlying tendency to greed lies within one. When one is touched by a painful feeling, if one sorrows, grieves, and laments. Weeping beats one's chest and becomes distraught. Then the underlying tendency to aversion lies within one. When one is touched by a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, if one does not understand as it actually is, the origination, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in regard to that feeling, then the underlying tendency to ignorance lies within one. Because that one shall here and now make an end of suffering without abandoning the underlying tendency to lust or pleasant feeling, without abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, without removing the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling, without abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge. This is impossible. Because dependent on the eye and form, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there arises a feeling, felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. When one is attached by a pleasant feeling, if one does not delight in it, welcome it, and remains attached with, the underlying tendency to greed does not lie within one. When one is touched by a painful feeling, if one does not sorrow, grieve, and lament, does not weep beating one's chest and become distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion does not lie within one. When one is touched by a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, if one understands as it actually is, the origin and the disappearance with regards to that feeling, then the underlying tendency to ignorance does not lie within one. Because that one shall here and now make an end of suffering by abandoning the underlying tendency to greed for pleasant feeling, by abolishing the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feeling, by eliminating the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling, by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge. This is possible. Seeing thus, because a well-taught noble disciple stops getting attached with the eye, attached with forms, attached with eye consciousness, attached with eye contact, attached with feeling, attached with craving. He stops being attached with the ear, attached with the nose, attached with the tongue, attached with the body. Stops being attached with the mind, attached with mind objects, attached with mind consciousness, attached with mind contact, attached with feeling, attached with craving. Without attachments, his mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes a knowledge, it is liberated. He understands what has to be done has been done. That is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now, while this discourse was being spoken, through not clinging, not being attached, the minds of 60 bhikkhus were liberated. I'll take a moment to gather myself also. Okay. So that is how the oral tradition would work. People would remember this, it would register and penetrate parts of the mind that don't get activated when you're reading things or learning things through some other medium. Okay. I'll do a very, very short and quick summary and we'll end the session today. I'd suggest you do a sitting after this. You will see all these things come up and you might even see, your mind might sense, how we get attached and become one. We become that thought. We become that anger. We become that fear. We become that greed. We become that irritation, right? So the Buddha says that identity that is coming up, that is driven by that greed, that becomes that greed, that is driven by that aversion, that becomes that aversion, that has come because of the circumstances, that has come because there are a lot of underlying circumstances. And as those circumstances go away, that will also go away. So thinking in that moment that all my life I'm going to feel this anger, or all my life I'm going to permanently feel this despair, or I'm going to feel permanently this greed, and only this can satisfy me, only this will keep me happy throughout forever. That is setting ourselves up for disappointment, right? So the Buddha says, identify this illusion at any moment, what you're thinking, what you're seeing. Don't become attached, don't become that thing. Don't become that thought. See that the thought has come up. Don't become that situation. See that the situation has come up and some action can be done. Okay, thanks. Any questions or any thoughts? Okay, we'll share some merit and just allow these words to float around for a bit.
Rajiv, the sutta that you read,
Yeah,
can we get the text to read?
yeah. Mridul, can you share that on the group?
Thank you.
May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving share all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May enlightened beings of mighty power share in this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu.